You are already inside before you think to look up. The noise finds you first, the same wall of mechanical sound that defines every mill floor in Lancashire in the 1830s, the combined percussion of spinning frames and power looms and overhead belts running in long continuous loops from the drive shafts mounted above the rows. The air is the same thick, warm mixture of cotton dust and vapour that coats the throat within the first few breaths. The gaslight throws its uneven yellow glow across the machinery and the workers moving beside it, and for a moment the room demands all of your attention at ground level. The frames, the belts, the hands, the cloth emerging slowly from the looms in pale folded lengths. Then something makes you look up, and the room changes. Running the length of the mill floor, perhaps 15 feet above the machinery, is a narrow raised walkway. It is a simple structure. Wooden planking, a railing on the open side supported by iron posts anchored into the floor below. It does not look like much. It is not decorative. It was not built for comfort. It was built for a single purpose, and that purpose is standing above this room and looking down into it, and there is a man on it right now doing exactly that. He is not moving. He stands at the railing with his hands resting on it and his gaze moving steadily across the floor below him, across the rows of machines, across the workers, across you, and then onward. He does not appear agitated. He does not appear particularly interested in any one thing. He is simply present and elevated, and his elevation changes the geometry of the entire room in a way that takes a moment to fully understand. Below the walkway, everything is in motion. Frames spin, belts turn, hands move in the specific repetitive patterns that this work demands. Reaching, adjusting, repairing, checking, reaching again. Feet shift, bodies lean. The floor is a surface of continuous controlled movement, and every person on it is producing something measurable and visible. Above all of it, the man at the railing is producing nothing measurable. He is not operating machinery. He is not repairing thread. He is not carrying anything or assembling anything or maintaining anything in the way that the workers below him are maintaining the equipment they stand beside. What he is doing is watching, and in this room, at this time, watching from that height is its own form of labor, or rather, its own form of authority, which is something different and more durable than labor. The walkway is not complicated. Height creates visibility. Visibility creates awareness. Awareness in the watched person creates a modification of behavior that serves the purposes of the person doing the watching. The whole system is expressed in that single raised platform running above the rows, and it costs almost nothing to maintain once it is built, because the workers below it maintain it themselves through their own continuous awareness of it. You understand this in your body before you understand it in your mind, the faint straightening of posture, the slight return of attention to whatever you were supposed to be doing, the awareness of being a figure in a room that someone is surveying from above. The machines don't produce that feeling. The walkway does. If you haven't already, subscribe to the archive. A comment below helps more than you might think. Now settle in. The shift has only just begun, and there is a great deal to observe from down here. Walk slowly along the outside edge of the loom row and pay attention to what you can see. The machines are arranged in long, straight lines running the full depth of the mill floor. This is partly practical. Straight rows allow the overhead drive shafts to distribute power evenly to each machine through a consistent belt length. The engineering logic and the production logic align, but the arrangement produces a secondary effect that is not incidental, and it does not take long working on this floor to understand what that effect is. From the walkway above, a straight row of machines is a line of perfect visibility. There is no natural obstruction. There is no corner to turn behind, no cluster of equipment that creates a pocket of shadow deep enough to conceal behavior. A worker standing at the third frame from the end of a row is as visible from the walkway as the worker standing at the first frame. A stopped hand at position 12 is as readable from above as a stopped hand at position 2. The geometry of the room has been arranged, whether consciously or as a byproduct of mechanical necessity, so that irregular movement anywhere on the floor is legible from a single elevated position. The overseer does not need to watch every worker constantly. This is important to understand because it is the efficiency of the system that gives it its power. Constant direct observation of every individual simultaneously would require an impossible number of watchers. What the walkway produces instead is something more economical, the credible possibility of observation at any moment. The overseer turns his gaze along the row, and any worker in that row may be the one he is looking at. The worker cannot easily determine whether they are being watched at this precise second or not, and so the worker behaves as though they might be, which produces the same result as being watched without requiring the watcher's continuous attention. Workers begin correcting themselves. This is the mechanism that makes the system genuinely efficient. A posture that has begun to sag straightens slightly when the worker becomes aware that the overseer has turned in their direction. A hand that has paused longer than it should resumes its work. A brief sideways glance at the worker in the next row is cut short. The correction happens before any intervention from above, which means the overseer's presence alone produces compliance that would otherwise require direct confrontation, fines, or dismissal. The threat does the work. The threat only needs to be real enough to be believed. There is a word that the philosopher Jeremy Bentham used in a different but related context around this same period. He was describing a prison design he called the panopticon, in which a central watchtower allowed a single guard to potentially observe every cell simultaneously. The inmates, unable to determine when they were being watched, would regulate their own behavior continuously. Bentham was describing a prison, but the principle he identified was already operating on factory floors without anyone naming it. The mill was not designed by a philosopher. It was designed by men who needed cloth produced efficiently and who found through practical experience that visibility was a form of discipline that paid for itself. You feel it again now, the slight awareness of the walkway above you, the slight adjustment in how you are standing, the slight sense that your stillness in this moment may be readable from above as something other than simple observation. You are not a worker here, but the room does not entirely know the difference. There is a way to stand in this room and a way not to stand in this room, and over time the workers learn the difference with a precision that has nothing to do with any written rule. Nobody posts a notice on the mill wall describing the correct posture for a frame operative during working hours. Nobody delivers a formal instruction about the angle at which the head should be held, or the appropriate distance between the body and the moving machinery, or the specific quality of attention that the hands should appear to carry even during the mechanical repetitions that require almost no conscious thought after the first few weeks of practice. These things are not written down because they do not need to be written down. The room teaches them. The walkway teaches them. The first time a worker receives a sharp word from the overseer for leaning against a frame during a slow moment, or for turning to speak to the person beside them, or for allowing their eyes to close briefly against a wave of exhaustion, the lesson is encoded in the body more permanently than any posted notice could achieve. The result is that factory labor shapes more than output. It shapes the physical presentation of the laboring body during the hours of the working day. A tired body must still appear alert. This is not a small demand. Genuine alertness and the appearance of alertness are different things, and maintaining the appearance when the reality has degraded requires a continuous low-level expenditure of effort that runs alongside the actual labor rather than being the same thing as it. The worker tends the frame and simultaneously tends their own posture. Both are running at once. The frame demands attention for mechanical reasons. The posture demands attention for social and disciplinary reasons. Neither stops while the other runs. A resting hand reads differently from above, depending on context. A hand paused because the thread has run smoothly through a difficult section and the worker is monitoring. The cloth looks different from a hand paused because the worker's attention has drifted. From the walkway, the distinction is not always clear. The worker knows this, and so a hand that has genuinely earned its brief stillness is often kept in the vicinity of the work anyway, close to the frame, close to the thread, positioned in a way that communicates engagement even when the engagement is momentary. The face becomes guarded in a particular way over time. Not blank. Blankness is its own form of readable signal, associated with dissociation and inattention. The face that survives the watchful floor longest is one that carries a neutral engagement, present, forward-facing, neither visibly suffering nor visibly distracted. Workers who are genuinely exhausted learn to organize their exhaustion so that it does not surface in the face or the posture in ways that invite attention. The effort of concealment is added silently to the effort of the labor itself. Conversation becomes a gesture that must be weighed before it happens. A brief exchange about a mechanical problem is defensible. A brief exchange about anything else is visible from above, and its defensibility depends entirely on the overseer's interpretation of what he sees. Two workers turning toward each other, even for a moment, produces a readable change in the visual field of the room. The turned bodies interrupt the row of forward-facing workers. The interruption is brief, but it is there, and whether it draws a response from the walkway depends on timing, on the overseer's current attention, on his mood, and on the accumulated history of each worker's visible behavior. The mill floor trains the body into a public language. It is a language with very few words, and all of them mean roughly the same thing. I am here, I am working, I am giving you no reason to look at me twice. The mill is one of the loudest enclosed spaces that most workers in this period will ever inhabit, and yet the particular silence it enforces is social rather than acoustic. The machinery produces noise at a level that makes ordinary speech functionally impossible across any distance, and difficult even at close range without raising the voice to a degree that draws its own kind of attention. Workers solved this problem, as we saw in the previous shift, through memoring, the exaggerated lip-reading and gesture system that grew up organically among people who needed to communicate and had no clean channel through which to do it. But memoing is itself a minimal language. It carries warnings, coordinates immediate tasks, and signals the overseer's position. It does not carry opinions, complaints, observations, plans, or the ordinary texture of human conversation between people who spend 10 or 12 hours together in the same room. That texture is largely absent from the mill floor, and its absence is not accidental. Speech is visible before it is audible in a room arranged like this one. From the walkway above, a worker who turns to speak to their neighbor produces a visible change in posture and orientation before a single word has been exchanged. The turned head, the slight lean toward the other person, the brief suspension of task-focused movement, these are all readable signals that precede any content. The overseer does not need to hear the conversation to register that a conversation is happening. He only needs to see that two bodies have briefly oriented toward each other in a way that is not task-related. This means that the suppression of conversation on the mill floor operates at the level of the body rather than at the level of content. It is not primarily about what workers might say to each other. It is about the visibility of the act of saying anything at all. A worker who turns to speak takes their attention briefly away from the machine in a way that is visually legible from 15 feet above. The system punishes the gesture before it can assess the content. The effect of this over a long period of time is a particular kind of social isolation that exists in the middle of a crowd. The worker stands inches from other workers for the full length of the shift. They share the same mechanical rhythm, the same noise, the same cotton dust, the same uneven gaslight. They have developed, over weeks and months of shared shifts, the non-verbal literacy of memoing, the ability to read physical signals at a distance, the intimate knowledge of each other's working habits and tendencies and particular styles of fatigue. And yet sustained conversation, the building of shared narrative and common understanding through language, is largely unavailable to them during the hours when they are most together. The walkway does not only suppress idleness, it suppresses something harder to name, the collective sense of shared experience that workers might develop if they were freely able to articulate that experience to each other. A complaint spoken aloud and heard and confirmed by the person beside you becomes a shared complaint. A shared complaint is a different kind of thing than a private one. The mill floor produces private complaints in abundance. The walkway helps ensure they remain that way. The room is full of people standing very close together. It is also, in the way that matters most, a room of individuals. Watch the overseer for a few minutes without looking at anything else, and something becomes clear. He is not doing very much. This is not a criticism. It is, in fact, the point. He moves along the walkway at intervals, a slow walk from one end of his section to the other, a pause at the rail, a period of observation, another slow walk back. He does not rush. He has no reason to rush, because the rushing is happening below him, and it will continue happening below him, whether he stands still or moves, whether he is looking at the near end of the floor or the far end. The machinery enforces the pace. The workers respond to the machinery. The overseer's job is not to drive the pace, but to monitor its maintenance and address its interruptions. His stillness is not idleness. It is a form of presence that communicates something specific to the people below. A still figure in a room of continuous motion stands out in the same way that a moving figure stands out in a still room. The contrast is what carries the meaning. Below the walkway, time is measured in action, in the number of frames tended, threads repaired, lengths of cloth produced, mechanical interventions completed. The worker's presence is justified by continuous visible output. A worker standing still without visible cause is a worker who can be questioned about why they are standing still. The overseer's presence requires no such justification. He is still because stillness is what his position looks like. He is observing because observation is his function. The authority is in the position itself, and the position is expressed most clearly by the contrast between his posture and everyone else's. He holds the power to file reports, levy fines, recommend dismissal, or adjust a worker's assignment. He controls the written record of each worker's daily performance in a mill where that record has direct consequences for wages and continued employment. He can speak to a worker directly, which in this room, where speech is otherwise suppressed, is itself a significant act. A quiet word from the walkway, barely audible over the machinery, carries weight precisely because such words are rare and because the worker knows that a quiet word can be followed by something less quiet if the situation warrants it. None of this needs to be performed dramatically. The overseer does not need to shout to make his authority felt. He does not need to descend from the walkway and physically intervene in the work. The most effective version of this authority requires almost no action at all, only presence, only elevation, only the visible capacity to observe and the known willingness to respond to what is observed. A shouting overseer is a visible one. His attention is declared. A silent overseer is something less comfortable. His attention is possible, which is not the same as declared, and possible attention covers the whole floor simultaneously in a way that declared attention, focused on one incident or one worker, cannot. The calmest figure in the room is often the one worth watching most carefully. After enough shifts on the same floor, the room stops being just a room. It becomes a map, not a map that a worker could draw on paper or describe in precise terms, but a map encoded in the body through accumulated experience, a learned understanding of which positions on the floor carry more exposure and which carry less, which machines sit directly beneath the railing of the walkway and which sit at an angle that reduces the overseer's direct sight line, which moments in the overseer's regular patrol bring his gaze toward the near rows and which moments turn it toward the far end of the floor. Workers absorb this knowledge without being taught it and without needing to discuss it. It accumulates through the ordinary experience of spending 12 hours a day in a space that carries consequences for being seen doing the wrong thing. The child who has worked in the mill for 6 months knows things about the geometry of the room that a visitor standing in it for the first time, you, for instance, would take much longer to understand. The experienced worker moves through the room with an awareness of exposure that has become so habitual it no longer registers as conscious calculation. This creates a secondary cognitive burden that sits alongside the labor itself. The worker tends the frame, which requires attention. The worker also tends their position in the room, which requires a different kind of attention. Background, continuous, not quite conscious, but always running. The two are not the same, and they do not draw on the same resources, but they share the same hours and the same body, and neither stops while the other runs. The factory floor doubles the burden of labor by requiring that the labor be performed correctly, and that the performance of the labor appear correct from above simultaneously. A skilled worker learns which micro-adjustments to their position are possible within the visible expectations of their role. The slight lean against the frame during a moment when the machinery runs smoothly and nothing requires immediate intervention is a rest that looks, from the walkway, like monitoring. The brief turning of the head to follow a belt that is running slightly irregularly is a genuine task that also allows the eyes to move away from the frame without producing the visible signature of inattention. These are not deceptions exactly. They are adaptations. The body learning to extract what small relief is available within the narrow range of behavior the room permits. The experienced worker also knows the overseer in the way that people come to know the routines of anyone whose patterns matter to them. The particular walk, the preferred position at the railing, the tendency to turn first toward one end of the floor rather than the other, the moments when his attention appears most concentrated and the moments when it appears more general. None of this knowledge protects a worker completely. The overseer's behavior has enough variation to prevent any reliable prediction, but the knowledge gives the experienced worker a slightly better calibration of when the visible field is more likely to be swept in their direction, and calibration is what the body uses to manage the continuous low-level calculation of exposure. The room watches, the body learns the room. The learning takes months, and it never quite finishes, because the system has enough variation built into it, deliberately or otherwise, to prevent the learned map from ever becoming fully reliable. The walkway does not distinguish between a worker who is 40 years old and one who is 7. From 15 feet above the floor, the smallest scavenger moving beneath the machinery is as visible as the most experienced frame operative standing beside it. The elevated sightline flattens the distinctions of age and size into a single shared condition. Everything on the floor is observable, and observable things within this system are things that can be assessed, evaluated, and if necessary corrected. The child is part of the visible floor from the moment they enter it. Children in the mill came to this system with less than the adults around them, less physical endurance, less developed capacity for sustained attention over long hours, less ability to regulate the visible signs of exhaustion, the wavering posture, the slowing hands, the momentary fixed stare that appears when concentration has briefly collapsed. Adults on the mill floor have learned, through months or years of experience, how to manage the presentation of their own fatigue so that it does not surface too visibly in the posture and expression that the walkway reads. Children are still learning this, and the learning is urgent because the consequences of failing to manage it arrive quickly. A child's hesitation is highly visible because it interrupts the mechanical rhythm in a way that is readable from above. A child who moves too slowly through the space beneath the machinery, or who pauses to adjust their position, or whose hands slow visibly on a task, produces a deviation from the expected pattern of the floor. Deviations are what the walkway is designed to detect. The child's small body moving incorrectly or slowly is not invisible because it is small. It is visible precisely because the room has been arranged to make all movement legible. Fear in this context does not always announce itself loudly. It does not always arrive as a raised voice or a physical gesture from above. Sometimes it arrives as a glance, a sustained look from the walkway directed at a child who has slowed, lasting just long enough to be felt without a word being exchanged. The child looks up or senses the attention without quite seeing it, and the movement resumes. No confrontation has occurred. No fine has been levied. The system has corrected the deviation through the mechanism of possible consequence alone, which is cheaper and more efficient than any direct intervention. The factory does not adjust its expectations to account for the age of the body working within it. The frame requires the same maintenance from a child's hands as from an adult's. The thread requires the same repair speed. The overseer's walkway sees the same floor, regardless of who is on it. Children learn the map of the room, the positions of greater and lesser exposure, the patterns of the overseer's gaze, on the same timeline as adults, except that they are learning it while their bodies are less equipped to manage the underlying physical demands, and the gap between what the system requires and what the body can reliably provide is wider and more consistently present. The factory does not merely employ children, it runs them through the same system of observed labor that it runs everyone else through, and it does so before they have the physical resources or the accumulated experience to navigate that system with any efficiency. The small figure has moved out from beneath the frame and is already crossing towards the next section. From the walkway, the movement appears uninterrupted. The system registers a smooth and continuous operation. The most efficient form of discipline on this floor rarely involves contact of any kind. This is worth understanding carefully because it runs counter to the dramatic version of industrial authority that tends to dominate the imagination. There were brutal overlookers. There were mills where physical correction was common, where children were struck for slowness, where adult workers were handled roughly for infractions that a different overseer in a different mill would have addressed through a spoken word or a written warning. The record on this is not clean, and it would be dishonest to suggest otherwise. But the walkway, as a system, does not require that kind of intervention to function. It functions most efficiently in its absence. The overseer standing at the railing has a field of vision that covers most of the floor simultaneously. Within that field, every worker is potentially observable at any moment. The workers know this. The knowledge itself produces a continuous, low-level modification of behavior that requires no direct intervention from above to maintain. The worker who straightens their posture when they become aware of the overseer turning in their direction has already completed the system's work for it. No dissent from the walkway was required, no word was spoken, no fine was recorded. The observed possibility of consequence produced the behavioral result that direct consequence would also have produced, but at a fraction of the cost. This makes the walkway extraordinarily economical as a control system. The overseer's time and attention are finite. He cannot be in two places simultaneously. He cannot maintain a continuous, focused gaze on every worker across a floor of several hundred people. But the architecture of the room extends his effective reach far beyond what his actual attention in any given moment covers, because the workers fill in the gaps themselves through their own continuous awareness of possible observation. A note can be made without leaving the walkway. A fine can be recorded in a ledger that the worker will feel in their wages at the end of the week without any confrontation having occurred on the floor. A dismissal can be communicated at the end of a shift through a quiet word at the door, a single observable event removed from the machinery and the watching room that produced it. The consequences of being seen doing the wrong thing travel through channels that are largely invisible to the other workers on the floor, which keeps the system private and individual rather than collective. The worker lives beneath a set of consequences that may not arrive but may always arrive. The uncertainty is part of the mechanism. A worker who knew with certainty that they were not being watched at a specific moment might behave differently in that moment. A worker who cannot establish that certainty behaves as though the watch is continuous, which is functionally equivalent to a continuous watch without requiring one. The walkway does not need to be occupied every moment to do its work. It only needs to have been occupied enough times and to have produced enough consequences that its potential occupation is treated by the workers below it as a permanent condition. Stand still for a moment and look at the room as a whole rather than at any one part of it. The rows of machines running in straight parallel lines. The overhead shafts and belts distribute mechanical power evenly from the engine below through the full length of the floor. The gaslight is mounted at regular intervals along the walls and above the main rows, positioned to illuminate the working surfaces, while the upper reaches of the room remain in comparative shadow. The clocks on the walls, visible from most positions on the floor, keeping a time that belongs to the mill rather than to the workers. The bells that mark the beginning and end of shifts, the permitted intervals for eating, the transitions between the day's regulated periods. The walkway running above it all, its railing positioned so that a figure standing at it can see the full length of the floor without obstruction. None of these things is separately a surveillance system. Each has a practical justification that has nothing to do with watching. The straight rows serve the drive shafts. The gaslight serves visibility of the work. The clocks serve scheduling. The walkway, one could argue, serves the overseer's ability to monitor mechanical performance across a large floor without walking its full length every few minutes. But together, arranged in this particular configuration, they constitute something that functions as a sewing machine. The room has been organized so that work is visible, time is measured, deviation from the expected pattern is legible, and authority has a permanent elevated position from which to read everything below it. The workers cannot negotiate with this arrangement. They cannot appeal to the architecture. They cannot explain to the sight lines that they are tired, or that a particular task is harder today than it was yesterday, or that the machinery in their section has been running irregularly and requires more careful attention than usual. The mill watches because it is built to watch. The oversight is not a person standing on a walkway. The person standing on the walkway is simply the human component of a system that the room itself maintains through its arrangement of space, light, time, and mechanical coupling. This is what makes it durable. Systems that depend entirely on specific individuals are only as consistent as those individuals. A harsh overseer who leaves is replaced by the next one, and the next one may be different in temperament, in strictness, in the degree to which they deploy the authority of the walkway actively. But the walkway remains, the straight rows remain, the clocks remain. The architecture of observation persists, regardless of who is standing in it or how they choose to use it, and workers who have internalized the map of the room carry it with them, regardless of which specific overseer is on duty on any given day. The system has been installed into the building itself. The building watches, even when no one says the word watch. The shift ends the way most shifts end, but with a change in the mechanical rhythm that every worker on the floor registers before the bell confirms it. Machines slow. Some sections stop in sequence rather than simultaneously, the way a long-held breath releases in stages rather than all at once. The noise diminishes in layers, first the frames furthest from the main drive, then progressively toward the center of the floor. Workers begin the closing procedures for their stations, the small maintenance tasks and adjustments that prepare the machinery for the next shift's use. The motion that has filled every corner of the room for the past 12 hours does not vanish immediately. It winds down, and the winding down has its own rhythm and its own set of visible requirements. The walkway is empty now, or nearly so. The overseer has descended or moved to the far end where the closing procedures require his attention. From where you are standing, the raised platform is just a structure. Wood and iron and railing, lit unevenly by gaslight that has been burning all day and is beginning to show it in the quality of its flame. Without the figure at the railing, the walkway looks smaller than it did when the floor was running at full operation. It looks, in fact, like what it is, a simple elevated platform, nothing more. And yet the workers moving through their closing routines are moving through them in a particular way that has nothing to do with the current emptiness of the walkway above them. The posture that 12 hours of observation has reinforced does not dissolve at the end of the shift. The awareness of exposure that the room has been maintaining all day does not switch off when the bell sounds. The body carries what it has been trained to carry, and what it has been trained to carry today is exactly what it was trained to carry yesterday and the day before. Which means the training runs deep enough now that it does not require the presence of the trainer to operate. Workers leave through the mill doors into the street outside, and they carry the mill floor with them in the set of the shoulders, the downward angle of the head, the slight caution in the eyes that have spent the day managing their own visible presentation. The factory has not only taken the hours, it has taken the posture, the habits of attention, the bodily literacy of a room organized around the possibility of being seen. These things do not stay inside the building when the shift ends. They travel home in the bodies of the people who worked there. The walkway remains behind, empty and still. Its railing catches the last of the gaslight before the lamps are turned down. It is waiting in the way that architecture waits, without impatience, without opinion, without any awareness of what it is or what it does. The next shift will arrive before long. The system does not require one specific overseer or one specific arrangement of workers or any particular individual at all. It requires only the room, and the room is always ready. The raised position above the labor is already there. The sight lines are already drawn. The clocks are already keeping the mill's time. The arrangement of power above labor does not sleep between shifts. It simply waits. The machines have gone quiet, and the walkway stands empty above the darkened rows. You remain a moment longer on the floor, the cotton dust still settling slowly through the cooling air, the gaslight turned low, the railing above you catching the last of the flame. The room is the same room it was at the beginning of the shift. Nothing about it has changed. These are the systems that held entire working lives inside them, built not from cruelty alone, but from the simple arrangement of height, light, and the possibility of being seen. If you'd like to return, the archive is here.